Sure. And I just awesome.
And I'll let you take it away, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Perfect. And I just want to confirm that you can see my screen share.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay.
I mean, if everybody gets a little noisy on here, it's a small group. It looks like there's a few more coming in, but if it gets noisy, I'll have to mute everybody. So you may have to unmute yourself as well, Chris.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on that in the top,
Okay.
and I'll just switch over here into presentation view. Okay, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Just a brief introduction. My name is Chris Jokel. I'm the Senior Data Scientist at the Canadian Real Estate Association. Been with them for about 13 years now, and I am the lead contact on the Home Price Index file. And so in today's training session on the HPI, we're going to take a look at a brief introduction on what the MLS Home Price Index, or HPI, is, why it's the best price measure out there, and how realtors like yourselves can use it to your benefit. And I'll also take you through a brief overview of the dashboard tool that is available exclusively to you as members of the Peterborough Board. Now, the first and most important thing to know about the HPI is that it can help you with your CMA, but is not intended as a replacement for it. It's just going to be a very valuable tool in your toolkit and a reliable and accurate baseline to help you validate your CMA. Because, you know, as realtors, you're already market experts in your local neighborhoods, and what the HPI does is that it provides information on home prices and trends right down to those specific areas, which is going to give you the most detailed level of information on home prices and trends, because, you know, just like every real estate market in Canada is unique, so too are the neighborhoods within each market. Now, you already know this, but some of your clients might not. I don't know if some of you in the past might have had a client come up to you and say, well, you know, my neighbor just down the road sold their home about a year ago for this amount, so we can list my home about 10% above that, right? Now, you know this might not always be true, but how do you actually convince your client that they might need to adjust their pricing? Well, the HPI can help by showing exactly what prices are doing in their neighborhood. So they might need to price their home higher if certain areas of the market have seen very strong price growth, or they might need to actually adjust their price lower so their home doesn't sit on the market for a long time. And so when we talk about the price of a home, you know, how do attributes like the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms, the lot size, and a whole host of other features actually contribute to the price of a home? Well, the HPI does the work and answers this question for you. It uses more than 15 years of MLS system data and sophisticated statistical modeling. So it takes all of this data that it's used to define what we call a benchmark home as the baseline for its price models, which you can think of as a sort of virtual representation of what a typical middle-of-the-road home would look like for a particular property type in a particular neighborhood. And we'll get a little more into the specifics of benchmark homes later on. But for now, another important thing to know about the HPI is that it was developed specifically with realtors in mind. It was established by the resale industry for the resale industry. So while you might see other competing price measures out there, none of them are going to do as good a job as the HPI. And we release HPI data on the first business day of each month using data, again, that comes directly from sold listings right in your own MLS system. And the HPI is a constant quality index that provides an apples to apples comparison over time. So what does that mean? It means that it can also enable meaningful month-over-month trends, and it can identify turning points sooner than other price measures. And as I mentioned before, the HPI also goes deeper. It goes beyond the usual market level stats. It goes all the way down to the neighborhood level, which is going to be the most useful for you when you're looking at market trends. Now, the most common question for new users to the HPI is, you know, why? Why should I use it? A lot of people are already comfortable using averages and medians. You know, it's an easy concept to wrap your head around. It's an easy concept to explain to something else. However, One of the pitfalls of using averages or medians is that they are susceptible to large swings when there are sudden changes to the compositional mix of sales activity. And the way you can think of that statement is like this. Let's say that you take the average height of a classroom of children. And now you invite, let's say, the Toronto Raptors into the room, and you take the average height again. Well, what happens? The average height shoots way up, but no one's individual height has actually changed. And so now if you dismiss the basketball team and you take the average height again, it drops sharply, but no one has actually shrank. And so certain institutions, and of course the media, will frequently highlight average prices to show that housing markets are either crashing or on the verge of a bubble because of how easily they can be distorted by that composition of sales. You might remember in early 2017, the Canadian average home price rose almost 20% overnight and then dropped more than 15% over the next few months. Now, we already know this was caused by a flurry of high-end sales, mostly in the greater Vancouver and Toronto areas, entering and leaving the sales mix. But if you only looked at the average price, you'd think that the entire Canadian housing market had entered bubble territory and then crashed. Now, the home price index is not affected by the composition of higher or lower priced sales entering and leaving the sales mix because it's a constant quality measure. And as such, it's not subject to that same volatility as average and median prices. Now, as a realtor, your main use for the HPI will probably be to validate your CMA. However, there are other features that can help you do this, as well as other uses for the price data. So for example, if you've taken a listing that isn't similar to a typical middle of the road home in that neighborhood, you can compare the features of the benchmark home from the HPI to the features of your listing, and then make the appropriate adjustments to the list price based on the differences in the characteristics of the two. You can also compare price data across neighborhoods to get an understanding of how trends are evolving in other local areas that you serve, or you can compare benchmark home features for a particular property type across those neighborhoods as well. And finally, you can compare price trends for different property types, but within the same neighborhood, or compare benchmark home features for different property types within that neighborhood as well. So there's a lot of different comparisons that you can do with the HPI. And right now I'm going to show you a look at the dashboard tool. Again, it's available exclusively to members of Peterborough. And where you'll find this tool is if you go on Realtor Link and you go to the main Peterborough landing page, if you just select Peterborough from the drop-down list, it'll be right here at the top. And actually something really cool that your board did in the past 2 days is that you'll notice it's not just a dashboard for Peterborough anymore, but it's actually the unified ITSO dashboard, which means that instead of seeing areas and neighborhoods just for your board, because all the boards on ITSO have actually come together and entered into this sort of data share data from, I know that some of your members might be interested in Bancroft, but even other neighboring boards like Kawartha Lakes, et cetera, all the way around the horseshoe actually to Niagara. And another cool thing is that if you don't click on one of these boards, so for instance, if I selected Peterborough, what you're going to end up seeing is only the major areas and sub areas from your board. But if you actually leave this selected as all boards at the top, you'll be able to choose any major area, any board, and any neighborhood from every single board on the ITSO system. And now you have all that HPI data available at your fingertips. So for today's demonstration, I'm just going to use areas from your board, but of course you can mix and match to your heart's desire. And we'll stick with 2-story single-family homes. So just as a quick example, I'm just going to choose sort of 3 neighborhoods here at random. And what you end up seeing on the first chart is, the first feature of the dashboard tool is just a very simple line chart. And it's just going to show you how price trends have evolved over time from January of 2005, which is the starting point of the HPI, up until the most recent data point, which right now is February of 2022. And that's really all there is on this feature. You can navigate the features, of course, using the tabs here at the top, but it's just a very simple way of visualizing the HPI data. Now, in the axis on the left, you'll notice that we're looking at HPI values, and that's an index. And so the HPI is very useful for comparing price trends. But we know, and you know, that sometimes it's more useful or easier to understand looking at actual price levels, which is why at the top here, there's a small toggle. And if you switch to benchmark price, now you can actually see how the price levels, or affordability, if you will, splits out across the neighborhoods and property types that you have selected. And that's really all there is on the first feature. It's just a simple line chart. On the next feature, we're looking at a bar graph. And so instead of looking at the entire historical data for, again, the same property types and neighborhoods that you've chosen, just so you don't have to enter them every single time, we're looking at a cross section of the data. So we're just looking at how prices compare relative to 1 month ago. So how have they changed from January to February? And if you want, you can also choose other pre-selected points in time from this dropdown. So let's say you want to see how prices stack up versus, I don't know, a year ago. Well, you can select that, and now you'll actually see they're all sort of in the 30% range, but there's still some variance among these three and whatever other property types and neighborhoods you want to add on. Again, very simple. There's not a whole lot to choose from here, but that's basically how it's meant to be. It's meant to be a very simple and intuitive interface. And now for the more data-minded or data-oriented people, we also include a table here. Now, you might not end up using the bar graph, the table, and the line chart all at the same time. You might, choose to use one or three of them or all of them, but we just wanted to make sure there were a few ways available that you could sort of dissect the data and look at it. So again, all of your selections will appear here from the previous tabs. The most current data will appear in the leftmost column, and then you'll have just the raw data going back at pre-selected points in time. Now, if you're eyeballing this $547,300 and you're comparing it to where it was 6 months ago, unless you can do that math in your head super quick, it's kind of difficult to figure out, well, how much is that up or down? And so again, we have a small toggle here at the top. And if you click on percentage change, you'll actually be able to see that, okay, this benchmark price for this property type and neighborhood is up almost 14% compared to where it was 6 months ago. Now, the final three features of the tool that I'm going to review here, they've actually been added on in recent years, and it was in response to the most common member feedback that we were getting on how they use the tool and what they want to see. And so the first one by far was a lot of realtors telling us, okay, if I do a CMA, this is what I have to do, and I want to validate it with your HPI tool. I get that it's super accurate and reliable, but I'll show you what I have to do every single time. Let's say I've taken a listing that last sold in, I don't know, January of 2011. I have to copy down the benchmark price from your line chart. Then I have to copy down the benchmark price from the most recent data, calculate the percentage change between those two, and then apply that percentage change to my actual previous sold list price. And then I've got to do that every single time I'm validating a CMA. And so it's a lot of manual math that we decided to take out of the hands of realtors and just put here in what essentially is a very simple calculator. And the way it works is that in the first dropdown, you're going to have every single neighborhood and property type combination that is supported across all of ITSO. But of course, you can always just start typing something in case you don't want to browse like 10,000 neighborhoods. And I'll just stick with one central from your board as an example. And let's say we've taken a listing that last sold in January of 2011. And I'm just going to sort of throw out a random number here, but let's say it last sold for $300,000. And we're going to go ahead and hit enter. What you're going to see in the readout at the bottom is that based on the specific HPI models for the property type and the neighborhood that you've chosen, the previous sold price of your listing that you can manually input yourself, and the date that your listing last sold on, the estimated price as of the most recent data available would be that figure right there. And again, not at all intended to replace the work of your CMA, but it is going to be a very accurate and reliable baseline upon which you can build your list price. Now, the second to last feature here on the tool aims to answer the question, what exactly is a benchmark home in my neighborhood and what does it look like? Because, you know, our realtors expected to pull every single sold listing from the neighborhood going all the way back to January of 2005, just to figure out what the HPI thinks is a typical middle of the road home in their neighborhood? I mean, it's a lot of work, and the answer, of course, is no, which is why we developed what amounts to be a very simple lookup table here. And so let's say I'm just comparing 1- and 2-story homes, again, in that same neighborhood from your board. And just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to show you all the features available. And what you end up seeing is what a typical or middle of the road benchmark home for 1-story and 2-story single family properties looks like in whatever neighborhood that you've chosen. Now, the reason this is important is because when realtors see a benchmark price, let's say of almost $700,000 for a 1-story single family home in this neighborhood, at least now they know, okay, this is a price that reflects a home that looks like this, that has this many bedrooms, bathrooms, half bathrooms, above ground living area, lot size, and, you know, a whole host of other features. And that way, you know, if you've taken on a listing for a 1-story single family home that maybe has 4 above ground bedrooms, or maybe 1,500 square feet of living space above ground, you'll know that there has to be an upward adjustment on the benchmark price. But instead of keeping all this information in a black box and making you sort of guess off the cuff, we provided all that information here so you can actually make an educated and informed decision. And if you ever just want to reference the benchmark attributes, they're also here in the lookup table as well. So finally, we have the concordance tab or feature on the tool. And this is perhaps one of the most important features of the HPI tool, because you'll notice all of this information is stuff that comes right off your listing form, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of possible combinations and permutations of all of these, you know, types and styles and subtypes. And there really are only 3 or 4 major categories in the HPI. So another question we kept getting was, you know, how am I supposed to know what benchmark category my listing falls under? Because there are just so many different variations, but there's only a few categories to choose from in the HPI. And it's a very smart question that realtors were asking. And so we introduced a tool that can help map that property into the HPI. So let's just say we're looking at a freehold single family residential home. We'll do a simple example here, detached. The style, you know, sure, we'll go with a side split home, 1 level and no association fee. And based on all that information, the benchmark category that you're going to want to look at is 1-story single family homes. It's also important sometimes to use the concordance tool, because what some people might commonly think of as a 1-story home in their neighborhood, I know when I was doing a presentation to Nova Scotia, there were some people who thought that maybe a side split should be a 2-story. But the way that all of this information is grouped is that the machine learning algorithms that actually determine how each attribute affects the price will group all of the types and styles and association fees and so on and so forth into categories that actually display similar price trends, so that you'll be getting the most accurate and relevant price information. So if you're ever in doubt, I mean, you know, a condo apartment is a condo apartment, so that's easy, right? But if you're ever in doubt on what benchmark category to look at, just reference the concordance tool on the HPI. And I'm not going to go into any more detail on the other features here, just so I can get back to the presentation, but there is a link to the help guide in the bottom right corner of each tab of the tool, and that'll take you to an in-depth help guide with tutorial videos to use all the features, including the ones I didn't mention today. And just in case you were wondering, yes, there is a way to export all of your saved selections on the tool. There's a small download button in the bottom right corner. And if you click on that, then you can export individual tabs as images, so you don't have to worry about doing a screen grab, or you can export everything with all your saved selections and all your charts into a PDF or a PowerPoint. Now, before I continue on, I kind of just wanted to make a quick note here that, for better or worse, in today's age of the internet, we've all been exposed to the do-it-yourself or Dr. Google attitude, where it's super easy for anyone to look something up online, and then 1 or 2 minutes later, they consider themselves an expert in that subject. Now, every few years, we survey Canadians who have recently bought a home or are planning to soon. And one of the top reasons from those who indicated that they would not use a realtor was, I can just do it myself. Now, that said, an interesting takeaway from that very same survey was what ranked in the top 3 ideal qualities of a realtor when buying or selling a home. And that was a solid overall knowledge of the housing market. Now, the HPI provides added value by giving information that you can actually put in the hands of your clients and show them what prices are doing. And this is, of course, especially valuable in times of heightened uncertainty or unprecedented market conditions, kind of like the ones we've been in for the last couple of years. You've got consumers being bombarded on all sides by information. You have the media putting up 10 to 12 different housing articles a day, asking everyone what their opinion is. A couple of years ago, actually 2 years ago, you might remember that CMHC released a doom and gloom forecast saying that prices were going to drop 18%. And even this year, I think OSFI came out with their own prediction that prices in some markets might drop up to 15%. And so amid all this information out there, the HPI gives the opportunity to the realtor to step in and say to their client, no, look, this is what prices are actually doing right here in your local neighborhood. And the reason they can do that is because the HPI is such an advanced statistical price gauge that was developed and maintained by people with specialized skills in urban studies and house price modeling at Altus Group. And it was also developed in consultation with representatives from Statistics Canada and the Bank of Canada. And for most boards and associations participating in the HPI, it is their go-to price measure when communicating with the media and with their members on price trends. And it's also the price measure that we at CREA use when we provide price data, for example, to lobby the federal government or for requests from the media. Now, market level HPI data is distributed to all the big banks and major financial institutions, as well as different levels of government across the country. Even internationally, we send the data out to institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, and other financial stakeholders abroad. And the reason that these institutions all want access to the data is because they know that the HPI is now internationally recognized as being the most accurate and timely gauge of home price trends in Canada, bar none. Now, I'm going to get back to the meaning of a benchmark home and just go into the methodology a little bit, but not too much onto the technical weeds. The models for the HPI use benchmark homes as the basis for calculating the contribution of each feature or attribute to the price of the home. But what exactly is a benchmark home? Well, essentially, it's a middle-of-the-road representation of what a typical home will look like for a given property type in a particular neighborhood. It doesn't necessarily represent an actual existing home, but instead it combines all the typical features of a certain property type in that neighborhood. And every single neighborhood and property type combination will have its own distinct set of models in the HPI, so it's incredibly detailed. So just as a quick example, if we wanted to find the number of bedrooms for a benchmark home, what we would do is first collect all the sales for a certain property type in a particular neighborhood from January of 2005, which is the starting point of the HPI, up until the time the models were developed or the most recent annual review. And then we arrange all of these sales so that they're sorted from the smallest number of bedrooms to the largest number of bedrooms. And then finally, we pick the one that lands right in the middle of them. And this is called the median. And that would be the number of bedrooms for a benchmark home. And so this is why a benchmark home is referred to as middle of the road, because it's constructed from the attributes that fall in the middle of the range of all home sales. And other attributes for benchmark homes, like the number of bathrooms, the living area, and the lot size are all calculated in a similar way. And once all these characteristics have been obtained to build a typical middle of the road benchmark home, the models then use this information to determine how each attribute affects the price. Now, if you want to go even more into the technical details, we do have a detailed methodology document via the link to our MLS HPI reference materials at CREA.ca/HPI. But for most people, I think it's just mostly a cure for insomnia. Now, we've already touched on why the HPI is the superior price measure. And now let's look at some illustrative examples. And for those of you who hate charts, I promise we'll fly through this part. Now, these are the major price measures currently available at the national level. And they've all been indexed to January of 2005, which again is the starting point of the HPI. So the average price is the most commonly quoted measure, but as we've already covered, it's also the one that displays the most volatility. Now, TerraNet National Bank has a house price index that follows a similar trend as the MLS Home Price Index, but you'll notice it does so with a lag. And this is because TerraNet's house price index uses land registry data, which is based on closed sales. And we know that the time between when a sale occurs and when it actually closes can be, 1 to 2 months, which means that if you're using the TerraNet house price index, you're looking at trends that are already up to 2 months old. I've also included Statistics Canada's new housing price index. It's that sort of orange meandering line there at the bottom that attempts to measure prices for new builds, but it's kind of difficult to discern any useful trends or turning points from it, which is why it's not a very commonly used measure. And that's just a little HPI diss we like to include. So let's just look at benchmark prices. We're going to start with price trends for the board, then drill down to a major area, and then keep drilling down to the neighborhood. So you can see that the average and the median price follow the same general trend as the benchmark price, but obviously with more volatility. If you look at the average price on a month-to-month basis, it actually becomes very difficult to distinguish any useful information on turning points or where the market is headed next because of that constant up and down movement. And if we zoom in from the overall board to a major area, we see more volatility in the average and median prices. Because as the sample size of sales activity gets smaller, it becomes a lot easier for a handful of, let's say, high-end sales to distort averages and medians from one month to the next. Now, these movements are not reflected in the benchmark price because, again, it is a constant quality comparison of prices. And once we get all the way down to the neighborhood level, you can see how the diminished level of sales causes extreme volatility in the average and median price. Now, if you look at the, I want to say, almost seismographic pattern and magnitude of some of those month-over-month changes, how can you accurately inform your client on price movements in their local market if you're using information based on such unstable trends? Because if we move to a neighborhood that has even fewer sales, we see even more volatility is introduced to the average and median prices, which are now rising and falling by more than 80% in some months. Now, this isn't reflective of what's really happening with prices in this market at any given time, but without looking at the benchmark price, the real price trends are always obscured by this massive volatility. And finally, one of my favorite examples is that if you move to a neighborhood that typically sees a very low volume of sales activity, any semblance of price trends completely vanishes from the average and median prices. And you might also notice that there are large breakpoints in the average and median price data. And that's because there were some months when there just weren't any sales. And without any sales, you can't even calculate an average or a median price. However, the HPI remains uninterrupted over time because, number one, it uses a moving window to sample the data, obviously with much higher weighting given to the most recent month. But number two, it can actually group neighboring areas together in certain cases as long as they exhibit similar price movements for the same property type. And it's in cases like this where the HPI benchmark price really shines through. So now that we've covered off the advantages of using the HPI over other price measures, I'm just going to quickly take you through two examples of how you can actually apply the HPI to a listing. So in this example, the property pictured was originally purchased by a client in July 2012. There were significant renovations completed on the home, and then it was sold in April of 2015. Now, the table shows a select list of characteristics, both for the benchmark two-story home and for the listing itself. So in this example, we're looking at a home that is very similar to the typical two-story home in this neighborhood. And if we look at what happened with benchmark prices for two-story homes in this neighborhood between July 2012 and April 2015, and again, of course, you can generate this chart yourself using that performance over time line chart feature that we reviewed on the dashboard tool. There was a small downturn early on, but prices did pick back up, and over the time span, we have a decent amount of price growth. So just to recap, this home that was bought in 2012 and then sold in 2015 had significant renovations completed during that period of ownership. Now, the benchmark price for two-story single-family homes was up just a little over 7% in that time. And if we look at what happened with the actual sale price over the same period, we find that it was up 16%. Now, why would the sale price for this particular home exhibit more growth than the benchmark price over the same period if its attributes were all very similar to the benchmark home? Well, the answer, of course, lies in those renovations completed during those 3 years. If we look at the listing form from when this home was sold the second time in 2015, we find that those renovations include new interior paint, new exterior paint, new carpeting, new hardwood floors, and the addition of an extra bedroom on the main floor. So taking all that into consideration makes it easier to understand why the price of this home would have appreciated at a higher rate than the benchmark home. And of course, as realtors, you already understand the value that these improvements are going to add beyond the price growth for what is otherwise a typical home. And now we're going to take a look at an example of a listing that is not similar to a typical benchmark home in that same neighborhood. And so this home was originally purchased in 2007 and sold nearly 4 years later, but had no significant renovations made during that period of ownership. So instead of taking a listing that's almost identical to a typical middle-of-the-road home, we're now looking at a relatively smaller and older home that has fewer features compared to the benchmark home in this neighborhood. And again, looking at the trend for two-story benchmark prices from July 2007 to June 2011, we see that large decline and subsequent rebound from the financial recession. And after trending kind of sideways, a bit lower for about a year, prices began to rise again. So over the entire period, we have a modest amount of price growth. And going back to our listing example, this property that was bought in 2007 and sold in 2011 had no significant work done to the home in that time. And the two-story benchmark price for this neighborhood went up by just under 6%. And the actual sale price for the listing was up kind of a similar 2.5%. So in this case, we're looking at fairly close changes in the price, even though the listing had very different features from the benchmark home. Now, the main difference here is that the actual sale price of the listing was much lower than the benchmark price of a typical two-story home in this neighborhood. And based on our comparison of attributes from the earlier slide, We know this is because the listing represents a home that is smaller and has fewer features than the benchmark home. And so in general, this is going to mean adjusting the benchmark price downwards to reflect those changes. Now, I just wanted to make a quick note on the two examples that I showed you today. You know, while there are many instances where the actual prices and price changes will line up very closely with the benchmark, because it is, after all, based on sold listings coming from your system, I always intentionally choose examples where they don't, because that better demonstrates the capability of the MLS HPI. So for instance, you know, if I had cherry picked two listing examples where the actual sold prices line up within $1,000 of the benchmark price, and I don't know, a decimal point of the actual sold prices, it would have been really easy to say, well, would you look at that? The HPI is your perfect one-click solution to making your CMA, and it works every time. But I kind of feel like that's a little misleading and maybe not the most helpful teaching tool for you, because the value in knowing how to use the HPI is going to lie in your ability to understand how certain upgrades might add more value, or dissimilar features are going to require a price adjustment. Now, the benchmark price does provide a very accurate and reliable baseline upon which you can build your list price, but every home is unique. And again, the HPI is not intended to replace the work of your CMA. And so before I close off here, sometimes it can be useful to focus on the benchmark characteristics themselves instead of the price data. So for example, let's say you have a client who really wants to live in a two-story home, but they want to shop around and see what they can get in different neighborhoods. So they might come to you and ask, you know, what am I going to get for a typical two-story home in the neighborhoods in this area? And you can answer that question for them using the benchmark characteristics feature on the dashboard tool. So using that lookup table that we reviewed earlier, it's easy to see that two-story homes are much larger and have more features in that first neighborhood in this example compared to the other two neighborhoods, which would also partially explain why they are more expensive. Now, on the flip side, your clients might also tell you that they really want to buy a home in a specific neighborhood. Maybe it's to be closer to a specific school or closer to family. You know, they might be flexible on the type of home they're willing to buy, or based on their financial situation and the way the market is going, they might not qualify for the type of home that they were originally considering. So once again, you can present your clients with a similar comparison showing typical characteristics for different property types within that same neighborhood. So whereas in the previous slide, we were looking at the same property type across different neighborhoods, now we're looking at different property types, but within the same neighborhood. And you can, of course, mix and match different property types across different neighborhoods. You know, all that information is there waiting for you on the HPI tool. So I can definitely appreciate that we've covered a ton of ground in today's webinar. You can access a copy of this slideshow and more training resources via the link to our in-depth training on using the MLS HPI. And it's all there at crea.ca/HPI. And so before I open it up for any questions, I did want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to go through today's training session. If you have any further questions after you've had time to familiarize yourself with the HPI and the HPI tool, do be sure to check out those added training resources, or you can contact your local board. And if there are any questions that they can't answer, they'll just forward them on to me. Or if you have my contact information, actually, you can just skip that and just send them to me directly, and we'll make sure that any questions or concerns you have are addressed. And with that, I'd be more than happy to take questions, and I'll be around as long as necessary.
Great, Chris, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Come on, AJ. I know
Just
you
out
got
of
questions.
curiosity, how many data points make up the average benchmark home?
That's a good question. It depends. There's a quantity for each neighborhood. Basically the minimum threshold is that for a certain property type in a certain neighborhood, you need a minimum of 20 sales over a period of 3 years to qualify for inclusion. But you guys would know better than me, like some neighborhoods are really active, some of them are not so active, but it's 20 to get in and you got to fall below 12 to drop out. And so that way, every time there's an annual review year after year, you don't have certain neighborhoods that are dropping in and out of the HPI. So as long as you have more than 20, you're in. And as long as you stay above 12, you stay in.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Pardon me. Anybody else? Go ahead.
In the last couple of slides that you were showing the tables and the comparisons, can you just remind me where you get that information?
Sure. Actually, let me just go ahead and share my screen. Let me get out of here. So you already know where to find the tool, right, on Realtor Link? Yeah. And then on the benchmark comparison tab here, and I'm sorry, I might have to just refresh if it times out. So when you go to the tool, let me see if I can capture it all. There's the benchmark comparison tab here. It's the second last feature on the tool. And then if you select, you know, whatever neighborhoods and property types from the first drop down, and you can select everything, or you can just select a few of the benchmark features from the second drop down. And once you hit apply, that's how you'll be able to generate that lookup table that I showed you in the slideshow. In the slideshow, I was basically just showing, I think, only 7 or 8 different characteristics just as a summary, but there's a whole host of information that's here. But that's basically the tab where you can find all that.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
So has anybody in the group used it for waterfront? Like, I haven't used it yet, but I'm wondering how it works. Like if there's enough information.
Chris, you have a comment on waterfront?
Yes. So for instance, I'm looking at waterfront here, and I don't know where these neighborhoods are, but it says not applicable. But if there is enough sales data and you do have some neighborhoods that are on the waterfront and there is enough activity to have that included as a benchmark attribute, then you should see this waterfront switch over hopefully to maybe a yes or a no, or partial waterfront or full waterfront. It depends how your board has decided to set up the HPI for your neighborhoods. And I guess the more important question is, in your MLS system that feeds, that populates the RETS feed, is there a field for waterfront that can be pulled in?
Yes.
Okay, so then I would suggest checking out, I don't know, do you have an example of a neighborhood that would be on the waterfront?
Sure, I'll give you an address if you like.
I wouldn't be able to know off the top of my head with the address, but if you know the neighborhood.
Okay,
Those are all
so
in the same.
Selwyn and then Smith.
So let's see. It would have been Selwyn. That
Yep.
might be a top level area, or Smith.
So it should be in, okay, Smith Township then, 1 story.
Okay, so let's go to Smith Township. And so it looks like the waterfront here is not applicable. It depends. It really depends if your board had set that up with Altus or if that information is being populated, because is waterfront a mandatory field in the system?
No.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Oh, however, we, like, this is working great for city, but I'm a rural realtor, so I'm just questioning why our board, rural would be a large percentage of our volume, waterfront sales, and I'm just questioning.
Unfortunately, Judy, I don't know if there'd be enough data points to feed the machine to provide a meaningful answer.
Well, over 3 years on Chemong Lake, there'd certainly be 20 data points or more. Wouldn't there?
So if there are enough sales in the neighborhood obviously is there showing up in the HPI, but I think it depends on if it can reliably pull enough information, like would every single sale in that neighborhood have a field for waterfront that is set to, I don't know, yes or no, or whatever it would be, or is it sometimes possible that realtors would leave that field empty?
They wouldn't leave it empty if it was a waterfront sale. They would leave it empty if it wasn't. Correct?
Okay.
So if it's a waterfront sale, they would definitely be clicking yes in order to have it show up in the proper section of the MLS system. But if it was just a rural property. So I think what I'm getting from this is the HPI is great if you are in the city, but it doesn't work so well in a rural area.
So it looks like
actually-
it might work in a rural area, but it's the gap might be the waterfront itself.
Yeah, it's the waterfront itself. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I can check with Altus to see if waterfront is an eligible benchmark attribute for some of these neighborhoods, but basically whatever the models are pulling in is whatever they have access to on the RETS feed. And if there is enough data to populate that, you wouldn't see this not applicable here. So maybe it's just that there aren't enough listings with that information being populated, because certainly the neighborhoods themselves qualify for inclusion, but for whatever reason, that information isn't just getting transferred off the RETS.
Okay. Thanks.
Is there any thinking about making this searchable by map, so we can draw an area rather than by specific neighborhoods that are on our search criteria?
I think it depends on how your board has set up the HPI, because basically it starts at the neighborhood level and the board submits a set of polygons to Altus. And so these polygons are mapped up as latitude and longitude points, and that's how the neighborhoods are defined, or how the board has defined them. I don't think you can't really custom draw your own neighborhoods on the fly, because the models have to be built and reviewed, so that'll be a lot of computational work. But do the neighborhoods that you see on the HPI make sense to you?
They reflect the search areas that we have built into our MLS system, but from a practical perspective, the way I look at them now, it's almost legacy of an old way of looking at things. Everybody searches by map now. The problem I have with it is if I'm looking at, say, one north and one central, there's a road that divides those two areas. A house on the south side of the road is often, very comparable to the house on the north side of the road, but it won't show up as another data point unless I can draw a radius around that area. So I think it's still a very valuable tool. The reason I asked the question is we can get a little bit more granular, I think, if we could do it by radius or polygons and just draw our own shapes around a set of properties.
Okay, yeah, no, at this time, it's basically the polygons are fixed. If you ever feel like maybe, because I know that a lot of boards, they submit changes to Altus where they say, you know what, our neighborhoods, like they were from 10 years ago, just don't make sense anymore. And they just submit a list of new polygons to Altus, and Altus does that work for them and just updates the HPI. But as to custom polygons for users, no, because unfortunately they have to build a specific set of models for every single neighborhood, and then scrub that data, review it, pass it through all the algorithms, and make sure that it's clean and it's good, it's presentable.
Okay. The other question I had was, and maybe I'm getting too far into what I think this can do, but the system is pulling out what a benchmark home is. And one of the early comments you made that I probably misunderstood was we can kind of take a look at what each of the features is worth, as attach a value to a bedroom, attach a value to a fireplace. Can we do that in this system, or is it just giving us the benchmark data for those areas?
So right now, it just gives you the benchmark data for those areas, but because that's one of the most common requests that we've had from members, we're actually looking into future updates on the HPI, where eventually, hopefully one day, you'll be able to dial in the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, lot size for your listing. And then because the models already sort of know how much each feature contributes to the price, you'd be able to get an even more detailed and customized estimated price. Because right now you get an estimated benchmark price, but of course, you also have to make small adjustments if your listing maybe has a different number of bedrooms or bathrooms than the benchmark, right? So at this time, you're going to have to make those adjustments yourself based on your sort of local market knowledge and how much you think, certain features will add or detract from the home. But in the future, that's something that we're hoping to develop.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone else with questions? I think this has been really helpful. Seeing none, I think we'll thank you again for your time, Chris. Fantastic. And yeah, we look forward to taking this thing for a test run.
Awesome. Thanks very much for having me today, and hope everyone takes care, and AJ will be in contact.
Sounds good. Take care, man.
All right.
Thanks
See
a
you
lot,
guys. Have a
guys.
good day.
See you later.
Thanks a lot, Chris.